Galaxy 666 by Del Toro. Session 9.
Welcome back to Galaxy 666, your humble guide Toog here. Our journey has taken us far from the light of the literary world as we have sunk deep into the darkness that is Galaxy 666. If you have not visited sfgateway.com and retrieved a copy of the text, I strongly recommend you do so now so that you can experience firsthand the level of bizarreness we engaged in the first part of Chapter 4. Specifically, the dialogue. Whatever mechanism Pell used to maintain continuity during his creation of 666 failed him miserably here. On no less than 3 occasions, we had characters responding and arguing with themselves. In short, if you read the work yourself, you can easily determine that it makes better sense for Korzaak to be speaking instead of Ishklah, where your humble guide did it the other way round, and the writing is vague enough to support either decision. Consider it a form of audience participation. The trouble begins from the first time that Ishklah speaks. The first job! As we find out seconds later, he is and has been drinking heavily on the job, so this might be a toast, with his hand held up as if miming the action. It may be an initial statement that is cut off, or some note of regret or resignation to failure. As with much in this chapter, we are left to guess. Clearly, however, our concerns about alcohol were well-founded, as we see both of our protagonists, in their own words, sloshed. Although Alco does seem to have only a small percentage of alcohol in it, as one can drink 5 to 6 gallons at a go. Given the high level of current inebriation our characters are at when they make this observation, however, and remember they are currently on the job trying to think through a problem, we can take the comment with a grain of salt. Next, we see some of the obvious issues with the pulp fiction industry's high-speed work and lack of editing. The repetition of the line beginning, "Got any left?" faithfully reproduced in the audio reading. It could be that the duplication was intentional, meant to emphasize the character's deep connection with Alco, his estranged relationship with his father, whom he never could please, and early and unexpected death of his son, which shattered his erstwhile fragile marriage. But we know enough about Badger Publishing to recognize a group so simply hell-bent on getting the book out the door that they just didn't care and didn't note the mistake. These 2 areas, vagueness and slackness, are not overly trying for the reader, but what comes next is. The first line of substantial dialogue, "So we've botched our very first job," is not directly attributed to any speaker, but the next line, "That's no way to talk," is, and as such we can deduce that Korzaak has spoken the first line, as Ishklah is attributed to the second. Now the next paragraph, beginning with, "All right, you tell me a better way to talk," is a sharp retort to Ishklah, so it must be that Korzaak is speaking, as there are no other characters around. However, the next paragraph, "Do you think that's the trouble?" sounds like an observation by Ishklah in response to Korzaak's statement of the previous paragraph. So far, so good. But the very next line, "What do you mean?" is attributed to Ishklah. So he couldn't have made the observation, and what we now have is a situation that the phrase, "Do you think that's the trouble?" must be attributed to Korzaak. This is where punctuation could assist us, except for one problem. Galaxy 666 was written by a British writer, and published first in Great Britain. The convention in Great Britain is to use open and closing quotation marks for every paragraph, even if the same speaker is continuing his dialogue in the following paragraphs. In American writing and publishing, the standard convention is to place quotation marks at the beginning of all quoted speech, but only at the end of the paragraph where that specific speaker stops. As such, it is easy to determine if a speaker is continuing without direct attribution of the speech through a tool such as "Character 1 said" or "Said Character 2." But in the British writing, without attribution, we must guess. And though it is a stretch, in this case it is possible that Korzaak had a follow-on thought which would then make the dialogue fall into place in this instance. But let's continue on. In the very next couplet of lines, we have, "Look," said Korzaak, "do you think that in some crazy way we've been so steeped in the traditional ways of solving problems, ... And that final ... which is known in writing as an ellipse or a suspension point, is indicative of his speech being cut off by somebody. And who is that? "I see what you mean, but I don't think it applies," replied Korzaak. Korzaak. There's just no way around it. This is wrong, with Korzaak replying to himself. We could try to be generous and simply assume that it was a typo and the name should have been Ishklah, not Korzaak. But this is not a unique occurrence. Later on, we have a paragraph beginning with, "Now look," said Ishklah, "whoever those characters are in Galaxy 666, and ends with the ... again, showing a clear interruption by another character. And who is that other character? "One apocryphal planet doesn't make an apocryphal galaxy," Ishklah reminded him. Yes, it's Ishklah again. In this case, it does not help to change the name of one of the speakers because the dialogue before it lines up, as does the dialogue after, both of which have attribution of speakers. And again, a few lines later, if we follow the back and forth of the dialogue, we should have Ishklah speak the line, "Well, if the computer can't spot a pattern, I'm sure we can't." But Pell has attributed that line to Korzaak, causing us to switch the persona of who is arguing what point in the discussion. It is massively confusing. How hard is it to get the dialogue straight? How could you have one character respond to himself? Wouldn't it be obvious? Not necessarily. Not if you are trying to write down a story dictated to you on a recording device, and the one dictating the story is simply talking back and forth in character, not providing reader direction like he said or she said. Not if you are one of several responsible for writing down the dictation and reassembling the story. And not if there is no time to go back and make sure the continuity makes sense. I see more of the paw of Badger in this than the hand of Pell. One last point that I just can't leave. A list of words of one syllable by Korzaak. Computer, concrete, logical, and contradictory information. Varied gestalt detect. Synthesize completely random nonsense. Will the second half of Chapter 4 be as dicey as the first? Tune in next week to find out what will next go wrong in
Galaxy 666.
Here ends Session 9.